Economy is down that way. This line is for business class.
I know. I'm in 2A.
Of course you are. Mr. Miller, I'm so sorry. I had no idea who you were.
That's the problem. You didn't care who I was.
I was just stressed. Long day. It wasn't personal.
If I were just a regular passenger, would your behavior still be okay?
No passenger is a less than.
Because of how they look, what they wear, or where they sit.
I don't care who you think you are. I am the attendant here.
If you can't respect people when you don't know their title, you shouldn't be working here.
Are you going to fire me?
This airline will not tolerate discrimination, subtle or loud, ever again.
Everyone on this flight is about to witness something unforgettable. Because the man a flight attendant just mocked, humiliated, and brushed off as unimportant is actually her brand new CEO. The airport was buzzing, that restless energy right before a full flight. Rolling suitcases clicked over the tiles, boarding calls echoed from distant gates, and the smell of coffee and airplane fuel mixed in the air. Screens flashed, on time, in bright green, and people rushed past each other, each wrapped up in their own little world. Jordan Miller stood quietly in the boarding area, away from the chaos, near a column by the large window. Outside, he could see the plane he was about to board, white, clean, with the airline's logo stretched across the tail. His airline now. He wore a simple black hoodie, dark jeans, and clean but ordinary sneakers. No expensive watch, no designer jacket, no security detail. Just a worn leather backpack slung over one shoulder and a calm, steady posture that suggested he was comfortable anywhere he went. He was a black man in his early 40s, with short cropped hair and a neatly trimmed beard. If you looked closely at his eyes, you'd notice the way they scanned everything, details, people, interactions. This was someone used to making big decisions, someone who had sat in countless boardrooms and signed off on deals worth millions. But to most people in that line, he was just another traveler. A stressed-looking businessman nearby tapped impatiently at his phone. A young couple took selfies with their passports. A family tried to keep two small kids from running off. No one knew that the quiet man in the hoodie had just been named the new CEO of the airline they were about to fly with. The gate agent called his group to board. People surged forward, jostling for position, even though everyone was going to end up in the same airplane. Jordan stepped into line, unbothered. He could have asked for a private escort, a special announcement, priority everything. But he didn't want that. He wanted to see what a regular passenger saw. Feel what they felt. When he reached the front, the gate agent scanned his ticket. Her screen flashed a note, and her eyes widened for a split second. Then she looked up at him with a genuine, respectful smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Miller. Congratulations again." Her voice dropped just slightly on the last part, like she knew something no one else did and was trying not to give it away. Jordan nodded, a little shy about the attention. "Thank you," he said softly. She handed back his boarding pass almost like it was something special, and he stepped into the jet bridge. The air grew cooler and quieter as he walked down the narrow hallway, the sound of the airport fading behind him. The faint scent of jet fuel and recycled air drifted closer. He joined the short line to enter the plane. Ahead of him, a man in a pressed blazer adjusted his cufflinks. Behind him, someone complained on the phone about legroom. Jordan just stood there, patient, relaxed, ready to take it all in. That's when it happened. As he reached the aircraft door, a flight attendant glanced up from her checklist. Her eyes went straight to his hoodie, then to his backpack, then quickly up to his face. In that tiny pause, everything about her expression shifted. Her name tag read, L. Parker. Her professional smile tightened into something forced, almost annoyed. She straightened her posture, like she was about to deal with a problem, not welcome a guest. "Sir, economy is down that way," she said sharply, pointing toward the back with two fingers. Her voice was loud enough for several people in line to hear. "This line is for business class." Her tone wasn't helpful. It wasn't kind. It was dismissive, like she'd already decided who he was and where he belonged. A few passengers glanced at Jordan, then at his clothes, then at each other. Someone behind him snickered under their breath. Another person shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to notice. Jordan didn't react right away. He didn't get angry, didn't raise his voice. He simply reached out and calmly held up his boarding pass so she could see it clearly. "I know," he said evenly. "I'm in 2A. For a second, her eyes flicked to the boarding pass. "First class. Seat 2A. Priority. Cleared." Then, instead of apologizing, she let out a small, sarcastic laugh through her nose. "Of course you are," she muttered, just loud enough, rolling her eyes the slightest bit as she stepped aside. The man in the blazer behind Jordan smirked. One passenger gave a little chuckle, as if the whole thing was some kind of joke. Another just looked down at the floor, not wanting to get involved. Jordan felt the weight of all those eyes. The silent judgment. The unspoken message, you don't look like you belong here. He walked past her into the cabin, feeling more than just one person's disrespect. It was bigger than that. It was the assumptions. The way one looked at his skin, his clothes, and his backpack had been enough for her to decide he must be in the wrong place. What she didn't know was that the man she had just tried to push to the back of the plane was the new CEO of the entire airline. Jordan slid into his seat in the front row, still calm, still quiet. Business class smelled faintly of leather and coffee. Soft overhead lights glowed warmly, and the hum of the air system filled the quiet gaps between people's conversations. The seat was wide, the legroom generous, everything designed for comfort. But right then, the air felt just a little tighter. Across the aisle, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes studied him for a moment. She had a neat blazer, a paperback novel in her lap, and the gentle, composed look of someone who'd seen a lot in life. She leaned toward him slightly. I heard what she said, she whispered, her voice low but steady. You don't deserve that. I'm sorry. Her words cut through the invisible sting that had lingered since the doorway. Jordan turned his head and gave her a small, grateful smile. Thank you. I'll be okay. He meant it, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. People were still boarding, dragging carry-ons and wrestling with overhead bins. The usual shuffle, the usual noise. But for him, everything was a little bit sharper. Every look. Every whisper. Every movement of the flight attendant who just tried to send him to the back. Because the flight attendant wasn't finished. Parker moved through the cabin with her tray and forced smile, checking bags, gesturing people into their seats. Her expression shifted depending on who she was talking to. A man in a suit and tie. Can I help you with that, sir? Big bright smile. A woman with designer sunglasses. Welcome aboard, ma'am, let me know if you need anything. Warm, almost charming. Then her eyes would brush past Jordan, and the temperature dropped. Her lips thinned. Her gaze slid away like he was invisible, or worse, like she was trying not to be bothered by him. As passengers settled in and the overhead bins finally slammed shut, the cabin grew quieter. Engines hummed below, vibrating gently through the floor. Seatbelts clicked. Announcements played. Then came the usual moment of luxury up front, pre-flight drinks. Another flight attendant started at the far side, while Parker handled Jordan's side of the aisle. She began with the man one row back, her tone suddenly soft and friendly. What can I get you to start, sir? Champagne? Orange juice? He chuckled, flirting a little. Champagne sounds great. She laughed, nodded, set it down with care. Then she moved to the woman across the aisle from Jordan. And for you, ma'am. I'll take some sparkling water, the older woman replied. Parker smiled, set it down neatly, then turned, and walked right past Jordan's row without even slowing down. The older woman frowned and raised her hand. Excuse me, miss, you missed him. Parker glanced over like she was being forced to pause something more important. Oh, I'll get to him, she said quickly, the annoyance leaking through her voice. Then she turned away again, continuing down the aisle, tending to everyone else first. Jordan watched quietly, noticing everything. Conversations. Reactions. Who got treated gently? Who got ignored? The way her tone brightened for some passengers, then went flat when she reluctantly turned back toward him. The way a couple of people nearby avoided eye contact, pretending not to notice what was happening right in front of them. He leaned back slightly, almost as if he were observing a scene in a movie instead of living it. Finally, after serving nearly everyone else around him, Parker made her way back to his seat. This time, she didn't even bother with the fake smile. Drink? She asked flatly, eyes somewhere over his shoulder instead of on his face. Water is fine, Jordan answered, his voice calm, giving nothing away. She set the plastic cup down with a small thud on his tray table. No, sir, no, you're welcome, no acknowledgement at all. Then she turned away like he was an afterthought. Jordan said nothing. But he felt the older woman's eyes on him, watching, her jaw set. A few minutes later, as Parker disappeared into the front galley, another flight attendant slipped in behind her. Jordan could see them through the small opening in the curtain. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but they weren't exactly being quiet. Why are you being so cold to 2A? He asked, his voice low but clear. Parker let out a short, irritated breath. Please, she scoffed. You saw him. Hoodie, backpack, attitude. Probably upgraded with points and thinks he owns the place. People like that always cause problems. There it was. Not even hiding it. No attempt to be professional. Just pure judgment, built on nothing but a glance and a stereotype. Jordan heard every single word. The older woman across the aisle heard it too. Her lips pressed into a hard line. Her eyebrows knit together, a mixture of anger and disappointment flashing across her face. She started to lean forward, ready to say something, but Jordan raised a hand very gently without even looking over. "Let it play out," he said quietly, almost to himself. His voice wasn't bitter. It was measured. Controlled. Like someone who had seen this kind of thing before, and knew exactly what was coming. He took a slow sip of his water, eyes steady, mind already turning. Because something huge was coming that would flip the entire situation on its head. About an hour into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed, and the plane hummed steadily through the clouds. The outside world disappeared into darkness, replaced by the soft glow of reading lights, the quiet clink of ice in glasses, and the low murmur of conversations. Seatback screens flickered on. A few passengers pulled out laptops. Others closed their eyes and tried to sleep. To almost everyone on board, it felt like just another routine trip. Most passengers had no idea that today's flight was special. They didn't know that this route had been carefully chosen weeks in advance. That a handful of people at the very top of the company had circled this exact flight number in a meeting room filled with charts and performance reports. They didn't know the board of directors had secretly arranged this journey as an informal introduction flight for their new CEO. No cameras. No press. No staged speeches. Just a quiet trip where the man now in charge could watch and listen. Really listen. The airline's leaders had asked, "Sir, would you like a dedicated team? Extra service? Announcements in your honor?" Jordan had shut that down immediately. No special treatment, he told them firmly. If I'm going to fix problems, I need to see them. Not the polished version. The real one. He wanted raw reality. Real service. Real behavior. Real attitudes, especially when no one thought they were being watched. Now, here he was, seeing it up close. The way one flight attendant could quietly strip dignity from a paying passenger with a few words and a few looks. The way other staff noticed but stayed silent. The way fellow passengers shifted in their seats, unsure whether to speak up or pretend nothing was wrong. He sat in 2A, the hum of the engines beneath his feet, replaying every moment since boarding. The comment at the door. The skipped drink service. The whisper in the galley. This wasn't just about one rude exchange. It was a symptom. And he intended to treat the cause. Up front, behind the closed cockpit door, the captain glanced at the clock. They were well into cruise altitude now. The seatbelt sign was off. The flight was smooth. Time. He picked up the intercom and pressed the button. The familiar soft ding echoed through the cabin. The captain's voice suddenly crackled over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I hope you're enjoying our flight so far." A few people glanced up from their screens. Some adjusted their headphones. Others kept scrolling, half listening. "We have a very special guest on board today," the captain continued. Now he had their attention. Heads lifted. People paused mid-sip. A murmur moved lightly through the cabin like a breeze. In the front galley, Parker continued straightening a curtain, adjusting a stack of napkins, pretending she wasn't interested. She'd heard special guests before, frequent flyers, retired crew, the occasional mid-level executive. Nothing that really affected her. "Our new company leader is flying with us," the captain said, his voice growing warmer. "Please join me in welcoming the new CEO of our airline." A few passengers sat up straighter. Someone in row 3 whispered, "The CEO." Another quietly said, "On this flight. Mr. Jordan Miller, seated in 2A." The cabin went silent. It was like someone had pressed pause on the entire plane. Eyes turned, slowly at first, then all at once, toward the front row, to the man in the simple black hoodie who had been sitting there the whole time. Jordan looked up slowly, not dramatically, just calmly acknowledging the moment. He gave a small nod, not to show off, but out of basic respect for the passengers now staring at him. Across the aisle, the older woman's jaw dropped. Her gaze flicked from him, to his hoodie, to his backpack, then to the boarding door where she'd seen him being talked down to. And then something powerful crossed her face. Pride. Her lips curved into the proudest smile, like she'd just watched justice step into the light. In the front galley, Parker froze. Her hand slipped from the curtain she'd been pretending to fix. The napkins she was holding shifted in her fingers. Her body went still, every muscle locked. Her eyes widened as the captain's words repeated in her mind, *, our new CEO. Mr. Jordan Miller, seated in 2A. *. She looked toward him, really looked this time, and recognition hit her like turbulence. The man she had mocked at the door. The man she had tried to push to the back of the plane like he didn't belong. The man she had skipped, dismissed, and talked about behind his back. Was her new boss. And not just her boss. The most powerful person in the entire company. The one who signed off on policies. The one who decided standards. The one who could change everything about how she, and everyone like her, was expected to treat passengers. Her face drained of color. In her mind, all the moments replayed in brutal clarity. Economy is down that way, sir. Of course you are. People like that always cause problems. Now, those words weren't floating in the air, harmless and hidden. They were tied directly to the man in charge. Around them, the energy in the cabin shifted. Some passengers who had smirked at the doorway earlier now stared at their hands, shame creeping in. Others looked between Parker and Jordan, realizing what had just been exposed. A few stole glances full of quiet satisfaction, knowing they'd witnessed something unforgettable. Jordan didn't move. Didn't gloat. Didn't smirk. He just sat there in 2A, steady and composed, the very picture of controlled power. Because now, all that quiet cruelty had nowhere to hide. For several long minutes, Parker avoided him completely. She stayed in the galley with the curtain half closed, hovering in that narrow space like it was a shield. She rearranged plastic cups that were already perfectly stacked. She refolded napkins that didn't need folding. She checked the same inventory list twice, then 3 times. Anything to avoid walking back to 2A. Her mind raced. Asterisk the CEO. The CEO. The CEO, asterisk the word bounced around in her skull like turbulence. Every second that passed made the knot in her stomach tighter. From his seat, Jordan could see the shadow of her moving behind the curtain, pausing, pacing, hesitating. He didn't look angry. He just watched. Patient. Unflinching. In the rows nearby, the atmosphere had changed. People were quieter now, more aware. The older woman across the aisle pretended to read her book, but her eyes hadn't moved from the same line in several minutes. Eventually, duty forced Parker forward. She couldn't avoid the front cabin forever. People needed refills, blankets, small requests. And like it or not, part of that duty led straight past 2A. She took a breath, smoothed down her uniform, and stepped out from behind the curtain. Her steps were slower this time. Smaller. Her shoulders, once squared with stiff confidence, now seemed to fold inward. When she finally stopped at his row, her voice came out softer, like the air had been knocked out of her. "Mr. Miller," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, I'm so sorry. I had no idea who you were." Every word trembled. Jordan looked up at her with a calm, steady gaze. No raised eyebrows. No dramatic sigh. Just a quiet, focused attention that made her more uncomfortable than any outburst would have. "That's the problem," he replied. His voice was even. Controlled. But the words landed with weight. "You didn't care who I was." The older woman across the aisle looked over sharply, her expression saying, "Exactly." Parker opened her mouth to explain, to justify, to cling to the one excuse she had left, but Jordan raised a hand gently, stopping her before she could unleash a flood of rehearsed lines. "This isn't about me being the CEO," he continued. "If I were just a regular passenger, would your behavior still be okay?" Silence. It wasn't an accusation shouted in anger. It was a question. But it pierced deeper than any insult. The woman across the aisle nodded slightly, like she'd been waiting for that exact sentence. Parker swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry. I was just stressed. Long day. It wasn't personal." The older woman shook her head and finally spoke up, her voice clear and steady. "It felt personal," she said firmly. "You treated him differently from the moment you saw him. We all saw it." A few nearby passengers, who had been pretending to watch their screens, now glanced up and nodded too. One man who had chuckled earlier at the boarding door stared down at his hands, his cheeks faintly red. The truth was out in the open now. No more whispers. No more pretending it was nothing. Jordan didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her back. He didn't need to. He let the quiet sit for a moment, then spoke. "Here's what I believe," he said, his tone low but powerful. "No passenger is less than because of how they look, what they wear, or where they sit. Every person who steps onto this plane deserves respect. Period." He held her gaze. "If you can't treat people with respect when you don't know their title, you shouldn't be working here." Those words didn't just hit Parker. They sank into everyone within earshot. A man in row 3 shifted uncomfortably. A woman a few seats back nodded slowly as if she'd had her own memories of being treated like she didn't belong. Parker's eyes filled with tears. Her carefully built mask, years of customer service smiles and practiced lines, cracked. Are you going to fire me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jordan paused. He could have answered quickly. He could have punished her on the spot. But he didn't. "This isn't the place to decide that," he said finally. "But I am going to make sure this never happens to anyone else on my airline again." He didn't say, "my plane." He said, "my airline." The whole thing. Every route. Every crew. Every passenger. The rest of the flight was different. The energy in the cabin shifted in a way you could almost feel in the air. People sat a little straighter. Some stole glances at Jordan with a new kind of respect, not because he had power, but because of how he chose to use it. Others looked thoughtful, even guilty, wondering about their own quiet biases. Their own assumptions. Times they'd judged someone based on clothes, skin color, or seat number. And Parker. She moved through the cabin quietly now, not out of arrogance, but out of deep, uncomfortable reflection. Her tone softened with each passenger. "Can I get you anything else?" actually sounded sincere now. She offered blankets before being asked. She bent down to listen carefully when an older man struggled to reach his bag. For the first time that day, she wasn't just performing customer service. She was learning, painfully and publicly, what real respect was supposed to look like. When the plane landed and the wheels touched down, there was that familiar jolt, rubber meeting runway, engines roaring in reverse. A few people clapped quietly. Others woke up from light naps, blinking at the sudden brightness as the window shades lifted. The aircraft slowed, turned, and began its long taxi toward the gate. Inside, the cabin lights brightened again. Seatbelts clicked open the moment the sign turned off. Overhead bins flew up, bags shuffled down, and that restless end-of-flight energy filled the aisles. But under all that normal chaos, something else moved through the plane, a different kind of awareness. People stole glances toward 2A as they waited in the aisle. Some looked at Jordan with quiet admiration. Others looked ashamed of the way they'd laughed or stayed silent earlier. A few just looked thoughtful, like the flight had turned into something much bigger than transportation. When the plane finally parked and the doors opened with a cheerful ding, passengers began filing out slowly. One man in his 30s wearing a casual blazer stopped beside Jordan's seat, holding his backpack in one hand. "Thank you for saying something," he said, voice low but sincere. "Most of us just walk past this kind of thing." "You didn't." Jordan nodded. "We all have a responsibility," he replied. "Thanks for speaking up now." A middle-aged woman with work folders tucked under her arm paused next. "Keep this airline fair," she said, her tone half encouragement, half plea. "We're watching. And we're rooting for you." He gave a soft smile. "That's exactly the plan." The silver-haired woman across the aisle stood up and collected her things. Before she stepped out, she reached over and gently squeezed his hand. "We need more leaders like you," she said, eyes shining. "You didn't just defend yourself. You defended every person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong." "Thank you," he said quietly. "You spoke up too. That matters." She nodded, then made her way up the aisle, her back a little straighter than before. Row by row, the cabin emptied, until only a few passengers remained retrieving bags. Up at the door, Parker stood stiffly in her jump seat position, uniform perfectly in place, composure hanging by a thread. Her eyes were red, mascara slightly smudged at the edges. She'd been saying the same word over and over for the last 10 minutes, goodbye. But now it sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a nice day." Automatic. When Jordan finally stepped into the aisle and walked forward, the space between them felt heavy. She could feel him approaching before she saw him. The air itself seemed to tighten. When he reached the door, Parker couldn't meet his glance at first. Her eyes flicked down, then to the side, then finally up to his face, just for a second. "I'm truly sorry," she whispered, her voice raw and small. "Not because you're the CEO, but because I saw you as less for no reason. You didn't deserve that." For a moment, there was no one else. Just the man she had disrespected and the truth she could no longer outrun. Jordan studied her face, really saw her. Not just as the rude flight attendant, but as a human being standing in the worst moment of her career, forced to confront herself. "Change isn't about perfect people," he said. "It's about honest people willing to face what they've done and do better." Her forehead creased, surprised by his words. She had expected rage. Maybe a threat. Instead, she got something harder to receive, accountability mixed with a chance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple white card, clean and sharp. "Tomorrow," he said calmly, "report to headquarters. We're starting a new training and accountability program. I want you in the first group." She stared at the card like it was a verdict. She looked shocked. So. I still have a job. Her voice trembled, hope and fear crashing into each other. You have a chance, he replied. What you do with it is up to you. He held her gaze, his tone firm now. But hear me clearly, this airline will not tolerate discrimination, subtle or loud, ever again. Not in my cabins. Not at my gates. Not anywhere. Parker swallowed hard and nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in. This wasn't a free pass. It was an opportunity, and a warning. Understood, she whispered. Jordan stepped through the doorway and into the jet bridge. The cool air hit his face, and the noise of the terminal grew louder with each step. Waiting at the end of the jet bridge were a small group of people from corporate, no reporters with microphones, no bright TV cameras, just the company's internal media team with tablets and discreet cameras. They weren't there to glamorize him. They were there to document the beginning of something new. One of them stepped forward. Mr. Miller, we're ready whenever you are, she said. The board wanted us to capture your first day in action, for training, for leadership sessions, for the teams. He looked back once, through the open doorway, catching a final glimpse of the cabin, the rows of seats, the place where everything had just unfolded. Then he nodded. Good, he said. Let's show everyone what kind of airline we're going to be. A company where status doesn't decide your worth. Where a hoodie doesn't lower your value. Where every uniform, every seat, every accent, every skin tone is treated with equal dignity. And it all began because one flight attendant thought she knew exactly who a black man in a hoodie was. Until she discovered he was the one person she should have respected most, and the one who would make sure she never saw any passenger as less again. If this story grabbed you, don't let it end here. Tap that like button so more people hear it. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that expose hidden injustice and powerful turnarounds. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded, you never know who you're talking down to. Now I want to hear from you. If you had been sitting on that flight, watching this unfold in real time, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up, stayed silent, or handled it differently? Drop your answer in the comments, I'm reading every single one.